Okay, so we are gathered together to talk a little bit about desegregation of the schools in St. Mary's County, and our would-be host Elizabeth is in grade school, and I believe she is. I believe that she is unable to talk with us and host right now, but we'll forge ahead. And I'm Merideth Taylor, and I'm here with some folks who can speak firsthand about their experiences going to the desegregated schools or desegregating the schools. So I'm going to ask, this is kind of mean, but I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves briefly and fit yourselves into the timeline of desegregation. So I'd like to start with Janice.
I'm Janice Walthour, and I'm here as a representative of the NAACP in St. Mary's County and the Unified Committee for Afro-American Contributions. And I was a student in the segregated schools prior to desegregation, and have quite a story to tell about how I saw things progress and how my father and others worked as well. So I look forward to sharing more information.
Okay, we look forward to hearing it. And Stuart Newkirk.
Stuart Newkirk, and I was one of the first Black students to integrate Great Mills High School.
Okay, and do you remember when that was, by any chance?
That was over 55 years ago.
Oh, that's a long time.
I can walk to the closet and forget why I walked there. Now you want me to remember 55 years ago?
That's okay.
It was 66, something like that.
Yeah, 60. Okay, we'll get back to that anyway. All right, and Dr. Francine Dove Hawkins.
Hi, I'm Fran Hawkins, and I am representing my church, St. Peter Claver, NACP, and Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. And I was in junior high in 1965.
Hey guys.
Oh,
Guys.
hello.
Can I cut in real quick? Have we started already?
I'm sorry, our sound is distorted, so we're having trouble hearing that. I'm really sorry. All right, so we're going to jump right in, and I think we're hoping to have access to a timeline presentation on the desegregation, but we can always send that along later. So I'm going to start with asking Stuart to think back on 55 years or whatever it was to the 60s. And your father, Ted Newkirk, was a leader in NAACP's struggle to desegregate the schools in St. Mary's County, and specifically Great Mills High School, but the whole system. So he was an activist, and I'm curious about how you, as his son, felt about it at the time, and how you felt about the decision that your parents made to send you to Great Mills High School before the dual segregated system was ended. The dual segregated system was ended in 67, 68. So you were there a bit earlier, and there were very few African-American students. There had been an earlier lawsuit to desegregate Great Mills in 57, 58. But then after the two students, Joan Groves Briscoe and her brother were there, Joan Groves and her brother Conrad were there. There was quite a long time with there were very few African-American students. So Stuart, how did you feel when you think back? How did you feel then versus how you feel now?
I only caught part of that. Volume on this thing is terrible.
Okay.
How do I feel about it? Well, then it didn't matter because my parents we were indoctrinated early with a sense of prejudice in our community, and our parents instilled that in us. So we only had one way to think about it. What changed was the rubber kind of hit the road when they actually forced us to go to a white school. It was completely different. They really didn't prepare us for that. The anger and the hostility we encountered, there's only one way to learn to adjust to that is by being exposed to it. I don't know what else to say about that. How I felt about it.
Well,
I had some strong feel. I had some very strong feelings. I think I really resented my father putting us in that predicament. So I had a lot of real negative feelings towards him.
mm-hmm.
But in hindsight, he really did us a favor, because he always said, speaking to the boys, he always said, these are the people you're going to have to compete against when you get out into the real world. And he was right. So I think the experience at Great Mills helped prepare me for the workforce and after leaving St. Mary's County.
And do you think that was his intention as far as?
Yeah. Oh, I know that was his intention.
Yeah. Okay. So what were some of you want to share with us any particularly difficult aspect of it for you when you were experiencing it, or any incidents that you want to share?
Well, it wasn't all the students. It was just a small segment of the white kids were very hostile. You know, Charles and I having to get together to go to the bathroom to keep from being ganged up on. At some point, I thought nigger was my name. But when we went home, we didn't get a lot of sympathy from my father. He would say things like, are you a nigger? And we'd say no. And he said, never let another man define who you are. That's up to you to define who you are. And as long as you do that, no one can say something verbally to you that can control you, because only you define who you are. And that kind of, it didn't really make sense at the time he said it because of my age. But, you know, as I got older, it made more and more sense, you know.
So that's something positive that you took away from it, do you think? I mean, it affected you, that belief affected you for the rest of your life?
I didn't hear all of that.
That lesson, the lesson, don't let anyone else define you. Is that something that you took away from it that affected the rest of your life?
Oh, yeah, I live by it today. Okay. You have to. I mean, because people are always going to have different opinions about who they think you are. And if you go by what other people think of you, I mean, you'll find yourself all over the place. You have to decide who you are. And only you. So yeah, I live by that today.
So that sounds very positive. What about, you know, with your own children? If you just imagine, do you think you would have made that same decision? How do you feel about that now in terms of when you think about it as a father?
It's funny, I find myself repeating to them some of the things I thought my father was crazy for saying. When I was 16 to 17, I didn't think he knew very much. But I find out now, he was right about most things. So I try to instill that in my sons now, and sometimes they give me that same look that I used to give my father. You know, old man, you don't know the hell you're talking about, that kind of look.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, let's move on for now to Francine. And I had hoped that we would be showing a short video clip from the documentary on the desegregation of Great Mills High School. With all deliberate speed, one high school story. And that is available on the UCAC website and elsewhere. It's on YouTube. And Stuart and Francine are in that documentary. But Dora Sanasco was a teacher, and your teacher, and also went on to be an administrator in the schools. She actually graduated in an all-white class from Great Mills High School in the 50s. And she talks about a disagreement she had with her administrator about, she had chosen Fran Hawkins as the best student for a math award. And she actually got pushback on it. And I believe she said that, he said, well, no, that won't do because an African-American student couldn't be the best at math. And she said, well, yes, she is. And in fact, although she said she didn't really usually make a fuss, she did, and she awarded you that. So, and I think you had other similar situations, so with awards. So I'm curious about how you felt about it at the time and whether you knew what was going on behind the scenes at all. Can you tell us?
At the time, I did not know that had occurred, but certainly the students, me included, we already knew that there was an issue with race at Esperanza. We hated Esperanza with a passion. And every day there were fights, arguments. It was a disaster there. We knew that the leadership was biased. We knew that the teachers were biased. And I can't remember one person that went to school with me at the time that liked Esperanza. We couldn't wait to get out of that school. So it was not a surprise when Ms. Sanasco told us that story. And honestly, I knew that I was the best. So if there had been something that had indicated something different, I'm sure that my parents would have been in there because they had become used to going into the schools at that time. And my parents were not the so-called educated parents, especially my dad. And he didn't even have a high school education. So, but he would always be ready to advocate because that's what he did as an employee at Pax River. He was a steward, what they call a steward. And so he advocated for folks. And that's where my love for being an advocate started. I know it originated with him, and my love for education originated with my mom. So no, I didn't have an idea then. When I went to Great Mills, though, and I was asked to retake the French test after it was known that I would get the French award. And I found that excruciatingly humiliating. That, I mean, it really sort of took me back for a loop because my experiences at Great Mills, for the most part, were amazing. I had amazing teachers. Ms. Sanasco was still there. She was my favorite teacher at Esperanza. And so she had come to Great Mills, and Mrs. Fleming was my love, and Albus Mealy was my guidance counselor. So that incident really took me for a loop. And I remember going home and actually crying about that whole situation because I just couldn't understand it. But my parents understood it. And especially my dad understood why that had to be, because there was a group of parents, I don't know who they were, that had said that there was a relationship between Mrs. Fleming and myself. And so they considered that to be a bias, and there must have been something happening with that awarding of the French award. So I had to take the test again, and I won the award. So, but that set up all kinds of feelings within me by that point in time.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I've honestly carried those feelings forward in my life, trying to deal with them. And the number one feeling is suspicion. I am very suspicious of white folk. you know, I give them the leeway to establish for me that they are trustworthy. And after that, I move forward. I don't spend a lot of time doing that, but for the most part, they have to prove to me that they are less biased than what my experiences have been. And at the same time, like Stuart, I know that it was all preparation for me, that it exposed things that I wasn't aware of fully. So it gave me the experience to be aware so that I could be compassionate and sensitive to what other people had experienced all along. I became closer to my dad as a result. And I've been able to help others through it all. So yeah, that's where I am today.
You think that, you know, just thinking about more broadly about segregated schools versus the desegregation process, that, you know, many people say that there were many things lost as well as gained. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you saw that?
Yes, you know, about our schools not being equal with supplies, books, and equipment. But I always felt in the segregated schools that love was the thing that conquered all for me. I went to St. Peter Claver Catholic school until grade 7, and then I went to the public schools. And then even in the public schools, although the first year I had a little bit of difficulty, the second year was integration, and it was beautiful in the 8th grade. Many of the folks I went to school at George Washington Carver in that 8th grade were military folks. And so that we developed relationships quickly and across racial lines, beautiful. It wasn't until the 9th grade at Esperanza that it became problematic for me. So I just think that now looking back, it depends on who you were with to figure out what your experiences were likely going to be at the time.
Okay, great. Well, let's move on to Dr. Walthour. And so Janice, you graduated in '64, right? And so so tell us more about going to school before the desegregation process really took hold. And also you attended both Catholic and public schools. And then, you know, how did that experience, how did you see it at the time? You were obviously aware of what was going on, even though at the time the schools did desegregate. I'm sure you were very aware, and you were away in college, but, you know, how did you think about it then, as well as then, you know, later?
Yes, I graduated from George Washington Carver High School in '64, but the school was actually built in 1958. And I started actually there in the 2nd grade because I did go to St. Peter Claver Catholic school in the 1st grade. And but we lived in an area called Carver Heights, which was the segregated housing development for civil service workers and military members that were on the base. So they had what they call the flat tops, which was for white, and the Carver Heights, which was for blacks. And we lived in that neighborhood, but we took a bus every day down to St. Inigo's Ridge area to go to St. Peter Claver. But my sister and I would beg to go to the school in our neighborhood, to Jarvisville, it was the name at that time, because one of the students actually, they had outdoor toilets and pumps and all in this system. You had your little cup and somebody pumped the water for you to drink water. But one of the students actually fell in the toilet that's what we went home and told my mom. Oh, my friend fell in the toilet today, but she didn't actually fall in the toilet. The flooring in the outdoor toilet broke, and she fell through, but not enough to, you know, hurt herself. So my mother said, okay, you're going to go to Jarvisville. And like Francine said, the love you felt there, it was just different. That's when I decided I wanted to be a teacher, because my second grade teacher was so wonderful, Miss Clayton. She would let us sit on her lap and she would hug us and all those kinds of things. So, and it was totally segregated. But the segregated schools, of course, that time when I went on to graduate, or well, they actually built George Washington Carver in 1958. And so, but they were under the guise of separate but equal. Everything had to be the same. So but the races couldn't mix. So we had, you know, the regular classes, we had the commercial track, the academic track, the general track. I was in the academic that was set up for college. We had physics and trigonometry. We had all those courses that were slated to be taught as well in the white schools. But of course, as you've heard before, whenever we did chemistry experiments, we never had enough Bunsen burners or Petri dishes, the kinds of things that you really needed to go into depth with the chemistry experiments. So people were always looking for materials. We would do experiments, but I assume we probably could have done more in depth at that time. And of course, my father was like Francine. I didn't realize her dad was a shop steward, they call it, with the union. So he was very active, not only on the base, he was a civil service worker, is what we always called them on the base, but he also was very active with Stuart's father, Ted Newkirk, with the NAACP. And they formed other organizations like civics associations to deal with desegregation of the schools. And I wanted to really mention, it was school desegregation that was the first, you know, to tackle in St. Mary's County, but they were also tackling public accommodations, because African Americans couldn't, you had to go on the side door in the theater, you had to go upstairs, you had to go in a separate line, you couldn't eat in the restaurants. So they were really tackling that as well. And in my family, I didn't know, we lived in Valley Lee. We had moved from Carver Heights at that time over to the Valley Lee area. And because of my father's activism, a cross was actually burned across the street from our house, and several crosses in the neighborhood at that time. So it really did have an impact in our family. Of course, I was kind of protected from that. My father didn't, you know, he didn't go berserk or anything, but we knew that there was trouble brewing, and that these folks working enough to desegregate the school systems and to get public accommodations were on the hot seat. And so that was something that I experienced. And then, as Francine mentioned, at Carver, actually at George Washington Carver, prior to the actual full onslaught of desegregation, that school became a junior high school, and students went to Carver as a desegregated school. And my uncle, who was principal, who was a teacher or assistant principal at Carver, was moved to Park Hall Elementary School, and he became principal there. So I would assume, when I was looking at the information here, that he was probably the first, or one of the first, African-American principals in the desegregated school system, but that was prior to full desegregation. And so it was a time, but of course, as I said, during that time, I was away at school and college, but knew what was happening.
Do you think you could make some comments about the connection, or what you see as the connection between then and now? I know that, you know, the students today have a lot of are very articulate about the problems that they see, but do you think that there is a connection? Do you think they see a connection when they look back? We did a program recently on the schools, the one-room schools during segregation, and we had some students, current students, talk, and I was wondering as they were talking whether they saw a connection, whether that history was relevant. So is that history relevant to young people today? What do you think?
I would think it depends on their family connections as well, you know, what they talk about in their homes and what they're learning. But it's obvious that the students really feel that the connection is very limited because there is a group of students who are past former students of the school system, and students even that are in schools now, in the public schools now, that wrote a petition called Re-Educate St. Mary's. And they want to know more about the past. They want to know more about segregation and social justice issues that impact them today, and that, and looking back at the history, they don't feel that they have really been told the full story. They want to see more African-American teachers and teachers of color in their schools. Some students can say that they have gone through all 12 years of their experience in school and never ever had a teacher of color, African-American teacher, a teacher of color. So the students are realizing that, and they're asking why, and they want to see change. So I think this things, what goes around comes around, and there's a cycle now of where the youth are really saying, well, where did all this stem from? What is all this divisiveness and racial hatred and, you know, hatred of gender or other people that have different ways of living, different religions? And so just the whole idea there, that I think they understand that there's a connection and that there needs to be change.
And there's also the schools are legal segregation is long gone, but there's still a great deal of segregation in terms of in the schools, right? Because of where people live, and so segregation. Learning about others who are maybe not like you is still very limited all over the country. And actually, when I did the documentary With All Deliberate Speed, One High School Story about Great Mills process, I worked with an English class there, and we did some interesting research. One passing period, lunch period or passing period, the students went out and surveyed the other students at Great Mills, and they asked them, was Great Mills High School ever segregated? And you can't imagine. I mean, I think people really barely knew what segregation or desegregation was, and they were quite surprised, many of them, to learn that, in fact, the schools here had been segregated. And that was a few years back, but still there is so little stress, I think, put on that history. And I mean, partly because it's awkward and it's messy and it's painful to some people. But I think really very few people probably know that the schools in St. Mary's County were desegregated by, that people had to go to court, that they were sued. Great Mills High School was sued. And even though the Board of Education started, they said they accepted a couple of years after the Brown v. Board decision to integrate the schools, that it was unconstitutional to the segregated schools. They, by 1956, 2 years after the decision, put into place their first policy, which said that they would start gradually, that people had to apply and be okayed to attend, to change schools. and they would start in the elementary grades. And but actually there was very slow action on that, but they had actually already been sued the year before, just for several months before. The first suit was in 1955, and Fanny Robinson, I believe it was, sued on behalf of her daughter and 65 other children. And they were turned down. So then the gradual process was what the school board was making an effort towards. And basically there was very little actual attempt to attend, to desegregate the schools until the mid-60s. So I think that it's an interesting history, and one that I hope more people will look into. So what else should we talk about? I wish we had some questions from our audience, but unless they are in the chat, we don't see them.
I'm here now. Can you guys hear me okay?
It's very, very distorted.
Okay, that's better. Okay, I'm gonna get a little bit closer.
That's better.
Okay,
That's better.
okay. I'm very sorry to the panelists and you, Meredith, and also to our attendees. I apologize for all of the technical difficulties that I had getting here today. Thank you guys for taking over and taking charge and making sure this happened. I am out in Drayton. I'm at the African American Schoolhouse in Drayton today, so that's why I'm having such technical difficulties. I had 2 mobile hotspots from the library with me. I'm using my phone as a hotspot. It turns out the issue was actually the laptop I was on. I switched laptops and it seems to be much better now. But I wanted to be out here at the African American Schoolhouse today because this was one of the segregated schools that we had in St. Mary's County. The school opened in 1890 and it closed in 1944. And so it closed before desegregation. And we had a number of schools in the county but there were a lot of schools that were like this, that were, like Janice said, that were separate, but they were not equal. Like the law said that they should be equal, but they were not in a number of ways, in the type of materials that the children had and the type of, the number of teachers that they were allowed, and just overall their education, they just weren't able to get an equal education for a number of reasons. So I wanted to be out here today because we've already done a program out here with the library at the Drayton Schoolhouse. So I wanted to be back out here again today for this program, just to kind of connect the whole thing together. This is one of the places where, education started in the county very early on. And I think it's an important place that we have, that we can, remember, because, it's important to our history. But it's also important because it reminds us that things were not equal. And that, we still have a lot to do in the way of making sure that education is equal for all of our children, even though everyone goes to school together, their education is not necessarily equal in a number of ways. Technical difficulties because I'm out in Drayton. So did you get to do the video clip that you wanted to do, Meredith?
No, I was assuming you were showing that.
Okay, I'm going to show, I still have that. Hopefully my issues don't cause any problems with the video. So for those that are attending, we have a brief clip that we wanted to show you that related to part of the conversation that Meredith had with Fran Hawkins about just one of the incidents that happened with her as a child, with her math award. You guys discussed that, right? I wasn't here, so I want to make sure.
About it, so it's okay.
They were completely lost. Okay, so I need to do a screen share, which I haven't done this yet on Zoom, so hopefully I do it correctly. So I'm going to share my screen, and I need to do, let's see, first, before I do that, let me go to the right tab.
But it's not necessary. I mean, we did talk about it. So I think
Talked about it?
yeah,
Did you
so I mean, it's not really necessary. And if we are going to increase our technical difficulties, I think we can do
And I
without
think
it.
you guys covered the, because I had that timeline as well, but I think, did you kind of covered all of those dates throughout the course of the over years of the process of desegregation?
Loosely. Yeah, 55, 56. Joan Groves and her brother Conrad, 57, 58. They had to appeal their lawsuit to desegregate Great Mills High School. And Conrad, that was Joan's senior year. So she was there 1 year and graduated. And Conrad, her brother, was very uncomfortable at Great Mills, and he transferred out after that year. And then I think there were maybe 1 or 2 African-American students over the intervening years until Stuart Newkirk was there. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so it starts. So I also put on there just, and this just covers the high schools. In 1954, when Brown v. Board came down, we had the Great Mills and Margaret Brent were the white high schools in the county. Obviously, there were a lot of other schools that, we can't talk about all that today and kind of fit that on here. And then we had the black high schools were the Cardinal Gibbons Institute. Did you guys touch on that, Janice? I know you had mentioned that and you wanted to kind of briefly touch on that.
I didn't, but I will just say a few words, and that the Cardinal Gibbons Institute was the first actually African-American high school for students in St. Mary's County, but students came from other areas to attend the Institute. And it was built on the order of, or to model Tuskegee Institute, because at that time, St. Mary's County was very agricultural. It was an agricultural county, but the land was barren. And so they wanted to figure out ways for farmers to grow their crops in more fertile soil. So they thought that this agricultural institute would help educate these citizens and the students in the area. And it was a Catholic, of course, high school run by the Jesuits. And it was also the elementary school there called St. Peter Claver. And the schools were taught by nuns, the Oblate Sisters of Providence, who were the first order of African-American nuns in the county. So it's a lot of history with that school. And but they actually closed before the schools desegregated. And eventually the institute was torn down, and the parishioners, the people in the community did not know that it was going to be torn down. It was built as a fallout shelter, so they couldn't really tear it down. They had to bury it. But that was another issue with just the whole system. No participation from the community was sought.
Actually, I would say just a couple of more things about Cardinal Gibbons Institute, because the early history of the founding from 1924 till 1933 is especially interesting. And the first principal and assistant principal did come from Tuskegee, But I think it's really important to know that it, although part of what they wanted to do was to teach agricultural and industrial education, they believed very strongly in liberal arts, and they taught African American literature and arts, and they were very progressive. The people who came, the Daniels, who were the principals, who came in 1924. And it was a tremendously ambitious program. It was funded from people all over the country. There was a tremendous fundraising, and it really was a nationally known experiment. It was truly an experiment, and it was the beginning of that uplift movement after the Civil War. And I really encourage people to learn more about that. St. Peter Claver is actually working on a museum, a small museum in Ridge, Maryland, and they're going to be telling that story and the story of the Catholic schools and from the missions that in the early, in the 17th century, up through the establishment of the churches and the schools. And so I'm very excited about that and have been working a little bit on that, and as has Fran. So also more about thinking about more of the social issues, that the farming, it was not really just that the land was played out. Some of the land was, but there was great disparity in the sizes of the farms, and most of the African American farmers had plots too small to actually make a go of it with any kind of commercial success. So there's a very big story in looking at that part of our history here in the county. So I just want to encourage people.
So I want to chime in real quick. We do have a question to all the panelists. It's from Michael, and he asked, what steps would you like to see taken so that we can improve opportunities for all?
Well, I can chime in on that because I chair the NAACP Education Committee, and of course the NAACP in St. Mary's County was very the pioneers, I would say, for desegregation. Stuart's dad, Ted Newkirk, was president of the NAACP, and he will tell you they didn't like me much, but I didn't care. So he was very outspoken, very driven for desegregation in schools, even to send his sons there, whether they wanted to go or not. But right now in the NAACP, with the social justice issues that are going on, the racism, one of the things that is being really the theme, I guess, is to go from protest to policy. And so that's very important that we go to the boardrooms, the school boards, the commissioners, and all these places to make sure that the policies that impact schools and integration and social justice, that these things be looked at. And right now in St. Mary's, we have an equity policy. Our NAACP has made recommendations over the years that have been put forward in this equity policy. So I would say in St. Mary's County, it's now from recommendation to policy, but we have to have the community involved. We have to have parents at the table, sitting at the table, diversity at the table. We have to have community at the table. In administration, you know, our teaching staff, it's only about 10% are minority or people of color. So when you sit down at the principal's table, at the superintendent's table, look around. Do you see people of color? Is there diversity? And there's not much in St. Mary's County. So we've got to look at the recommendations. We've got to involve people. We've got to hear from people. And we have to really move it into the structure of policy. And we have to monitor it. Accountability is important. We have to continue to pay attention to what is going on in our schools, in our community, at the commissioner's table as well. So we've moved from policy, from protest to recommendation to policy. And that's my
To
story.
add on to that, this is Francine. I think it's as critical, just as Janice, Dr. Walthour was talking about moving from protest to policy. I think the foundation is relationships. And the way that I've overcome a lot of my suspicion is to just get with people so I can listen to them. Different people across all races, religions, whatever. It's so critical that we start with talking with each other, not to, but with each other, and listening and using our eyes to see people as far as what their hearts are. And because people are different, that doesn't mean that we don't have something that's much more in common than the differences. The things that really matter are the things that unite us. So I think that it's critical for us to go wherever we can to be exposed and to relate to folks. And so that's why I had fallen in love with that Dismantling Racism, Janice.
Mm-hmm.
That was when you're sitting next to someone who has a different opinion and you hear them talk about why they do. And it's all based on the differences that we've had with experiences and the experiences that have been associated with our emotional development. And so to be able to talk that through has been just been so important for me. And here I am, 67, and I know that we can change from where we were to where we need to be. And so that's so critical for me. And then the other element, when we talk about the policy, we got to have the students at the table, because as I look at the protests and Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Do Matter, and people who can't say that Black Lives Matter, and people who can't say it because they think when we say Black Lives Matter, that white lives don't matter, that doesn't make sense. So it's critical that we have the young folks, the folks at colleges have been critical in making people aware. And so I think that having students of all ages come to that table and understand, that's why it's so important that we connect with kids so that they do know the history. Once people understand people's experiences, I think they're more likely to be open and amenable to change. That's so critical. So it's about relationships first and foremost, I really do believe. And from that, we can build policies and procedures that really need to be done. But it doesn't have to go that way. It can be policies that will make you, that will legalize behaviors, even though you might not like those behaviors. It'll make it so that you will have to act in that way. And then maybe respect will come from that. But it's always better, I think, if you can start the changes first inside internally and move externally. But that's not, we've seen with the civil rights movement that some things had to be legislated before people got.
Yeah, great comments. I'm curious whether Stuart Newkirk has anything to add to that.
No, I'm impressed with what the lady said, and I agree with it completely. My only concern is I have a problem even with my younger sons interacting with them, because like if they want to ask me something, they won't talk to me, they'll text it to me. And it's gotten to the point I don't respond to text messages anymore. I find this younger generation has a completely different way of communicating. And I think that's kind of holding us back, because they don't have that interaction like we had. When we were coming up, we actually spoke with one another, sat down, talked, had dinner. I don't know about this younger generation, how to reach them. I don't know if you guys have any ideas on that, but I am really at a loss. I remember once when one of my sons was in high school, he had a friend over. They were both sitting on the sofa and they were texting one another, but they were sitting next to one another, not talking, just texting. And I think we're losing something with our ability to communicate with one another because of that. And I think that's one thing that's holding us back.
I understand that. I have a young daughter, and but I tell you, I was always taught that you meet them where they are. And I know with her and her friends, a lot of them came up in the Institute. You know, Stuart, we had that group of the families in the community where we worked very closely with them. And they all communicate just like your son does. There's no question about that. That's their primary mode. And I had vowed that I would never text. My husband was worse than I, that we would never get into this text modality. And guess what we do? We text because we can't afford to lose them. And the more that you interact with them their way, I think that they will come at least to some agreement at some points, the things that are most important where they see a need that they have to reach everybody, that they will, on occasion, talk to you at the dinner table sooner or later. So I just say keep pressing, meet people where they are, and that's how they seem to grow. And I know that's how I've grown in the past.
I also think that's where community comes in, because kids, regardless of how much we meet them where they are and we try to communicate with our kids, there's only so much that they're going to communicate back with us. You know, throughout the generations, kids don't fully communicate with their parents. They, you know, we're their parents. There are other people in their lives that they also trust and depend on and communicate with and learn from. And I think that's where our community is important, and that's where bridging our generations is important. You know, I feel like, you know, I'm in a place where I can bridge generations, where between, you know, teenagers and, you know, people who are older parents, I can be that bridge between them, because, you know, I understand what it was like to live pre-technology, but I also understand the technology and I live with it and I use it well. And so, and I'm also one of those people in the community that, like, kids would talk to me, you know, they would trust me because I'm not the parent. So there are people like that in the community that we can trust and build relationships with, so that our kids will talk to them and learn those histories and learn to get out there and how to work together to make those changes that we're talking about, and do these things that we want them to participate in, and not just leave it to the grown-ups, you know, to change these policies and make these recommendations in the schools, and they take part in their own education and be a voice for themselves and learn that now. You know, we all work together to do that, and it's not just reliant on the parents and the educators.
It does take a village.
Yes.
Yes.
The NAACP has made a recommendation to the public schools to, of course, the schools do mentor programs, but we were looking at something called navigators to really help students. And I know that they're having trouble with the transitioning years with students in the schools, especially those that are your free or reduced meals or your students in poverty, really knowing what to do or having that guidance. So it's going to be important that the school system and the community work together to help navigate, help the students navigate, because there are issues where students are a lot, you know, you look at the desegregation or the segregation in these academies, fine arts, global studies, you're not going to find students of color or African-American students in those type programs. So the community, and to work with the parents, to get them involved and understand that you can apply for these programs. These are things that you have a right to be in and to participate in. So we're looking to that, and we're really monitoring and asking the questions, well, why aren't these students in international studies and those kinds of programs? Why aren't they in the dental assisting classes in the tech center? You know, there's some programs that are kind of, they gravitate toward the students of color do, but the others, they're not involved in. So those are questions that we have to answer. And those are issues of segregation and in 2020. So it's important to find out why and to really find solutions. As you said, and it takes a village, it takes the community, it takes the recommendations and the policies and the monitoring to see if it's going, if it's happening, and if the students are succeeding.
Hear, hear.
So It is a little after 1, so I hate to cut our conversation short. I know some people might be on their lunch break and they need to get back to work. But I want to finish up. I want to thank you all very, very much. I'm sorry I missed that first half of everything. Thank you, Merideth, for being our moderator. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Stuart. Stuart, I missed everything you had to say. I'm really interesting from watching the documentary. I wanted to listen in on it. I didn't get to mention at the beginning, we do have some partners because this is part of a series that the library is doing, the St. Mary's County Library is doing, Community Conversations on Race. So we are partnering with the Recreation and Parks Department, Museum Division, the NAACP Unit 7025, the Community Afro-American Contributions, and Historic Solderly. And I just want to let everyone who has attended know that I am going to send out an email. I will send information in that email about how you can access the documentary that Merideth had mentioned that she wrote. Sorry, I'm mixing up all my stuff, my books. Shoot, my mind went blank, Merideth.
The UCAC book. Did you want to mention the UCAC?
The documentary.
With all deliberate, yes, Janice is telling the book. With all deliberate speed, one high school story. And
yeah,
it's on the
to the store so that people can get that. And then there's also the book on there, In Relentless Pursuit of an Education. Also, yep, Janice is holding that up. Also, the library is having a book discussion for that book coming up on November the 17th. So I'll put that information in there as well. And then I'll also have a link in there to the library's YouTube channel. A couple of weeks ago, we did a tour of the African American Schoolhouse here in Drayton. So I'll put the link to that video as well. So there'll be some information coming to those of you that registered for the program today that were here. And I think that ties everything up. So I just want to thank you all very much again. Thank you to those that were able to attend today and asking questions. Michael has a comment here. He says, from Fran, I'm sorry. Fran says, Michael, we're hopeful about our future together. You have contributed to our hope by you and others being here today. Michael,
thank you.
Everyone, very informative. Makes me sad that our past has not been as good as I want our future to be. So yes, there's hope moving forward. So thank you, everyone. I hope everybody has a great day. I hope it warms up. It's cold in the schoolhouse. They don't have heaters. They didn't have heaters in the 1800s. Cold.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your work on this.
You're welcome.
The opportunity.
We have been moving.
Getting us going.
Hey, you guys have a great day.
Okay.
Yes, thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.